Welcome back to CivilNet. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Finnish Ambassador to the whole of the South Caucasus, Madam Kirsti Narinen. Thanks again, Madam Ambassador, for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here.
So one of the most interesting aspects about Finland is its comprehensive defense policy. Can you give us an overview? What are the core aspects of Finnish defense?
It's actually not only defense, it's about the comprehensive security concept, and that comprises of 7 elements, where military defense is only one part. It's also about the leadership, it's about international relations, it's about internal security, it's about economic relations, it's about the functionability of the society. Critical infrastructure is vital, and I think that the most vital is the psychological resilience of the people. And then the whole government approach means that we have all stakeholders engaged in these 7 functions, including the civil society organizations. And of course, that means that we have to be speaking the same language and kind of, blowing the wind to the same direction.
So how can Armenia foster greater cooperation between civil society and the people in general, foster resilience, like you mentioned? What can we do to implement some similar systems here?
Well, I think first of all, you should do the mapping of your society. What are the resilience elements that you have? Because they're never the same. So in each society, in each country has its own political history, has its own resources, its own traditions. But kind of the biggest problem usually is, and this is a European-wide, pan-European problem, is that the authorities do not converse enough with each other. They live in their own silos. And this is probably something that the central government needs to do. But it's also about awareness raising. It's about thinking that, or considering that what might be my role of my organization, how can I contribute? And then have the appropriate system to gather all these views together and build a resilient system. But this is a very long road to go. We have been building this for decades, but it would be good to start now when another changes are taking place in the society.
Yeah, the Zen saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now, right?
Yes, I think that anyways, it's something that you have to do, or one has to do anyways. And as I said, this is a pan-European project, also within the European Union. The same resilience debate is going on, which means that there's also a lot of international cooperation that is available for this purpose.
Can you expand a little bit on, you mentioned mapping out like resilient parts of society. What do you mean by that? Are you talking about, fathers or lawyers? Like, what do you mean by that specifically?
I mean specifically that the stakeholders of these 7 vital functions need to be kind of, aware of their role, and they need to be identified by themselves first, and then build a resilient system. But there has to be leadership, and this is why the leadership in the state level is quite important in this. Because I'm sure that there's a lot of will within the Armenian people to contribute to peace, and stability and security, but to channel that the right way, that is a challenge. There are no models for this. It needs to be a result of the internal debate.
So what steps did Finland take to cultivate a whole society approach? Finland is known as a high trust society, and stakeholders are aware and they're active participants. And how can Armenia, let's say, emulate or adapt some of these principles here?
Probably it would be good to go back to the history, because first of all, this whole system was built after the war. Because in the war we had, of course, conscript armies, and there were a lot of soldiers that came back from war who were doctors and lawyers and teachers and farmers.
Madam Ambassador, do you mean the Winter War or the Second War?
I mean the second one, okay. In 44, 45. And they had the desire to be patriots. And this is why the system was built, to give them the opportunity to use their skills both in the military perspective, but also in their civil life. It is very difficult to give examples of how we did that, because they cannot be copy-pasted. And first of all, the time for us starting to build this system was in the 50s. And today, of course, technology has a lot to play in this also. Media literacy and disinformation management has a vital role to play. So basically updating the needs and vulnerabilities of your society would be the kind of a very good starting point.
Well, how has Finland's conception of total defense helped mitigate threats from hybrid warfare? I mean, we're seeing it very seriously in Armenia right now. There's a lot of information warfare, both from our neighbor next door and a particularly larger neighbor to the north that happens to be a nuclear power, and I'm not talking about France. So how has Finland been able to mitigate these threats?
With the same tool. First of all, hybrid threat means that there is a synchronized and coordinated action from outside who is trying to infiltrate into the system, cause confusion, and make the decision makers make decisions that are not favorable to them, although in the short run they seem to be. And for this, the main thing is to raise the awareness so that you realize what is happening. You can identify the threats. You can map your vulnerabilities. Again, I'm coming to the same thing, because those are the vulnerabilities that the people who want to infiltrate your society have already mapped. So they know what your vulnerabilities is, and for this you need the intellectual honesty. In Finland there was a center of excellence for countering hybrid threats, an EU and NATO-based institution which was opened 7 years ago, and that gave a boost to the general awareness and the kind of, for instance, media debate about this. And I think that the Finnish people and the Finnish institutions, Finnish authorities on the state level, local level, regional level, are very well aware of what is happening. So when they see something irregular, they can give that irregularity a name. And that required a lot of work, a lot of proactive work from the media, for instance, but also from the decision makers, a lot of internal trainings, a lot of debate within the organizations also, that we would be able to identify the threat when there is one, and also to be able to also to identify the irregularities that are just irregularities. Media landscape is very different than it was like 5-6 years ago, 10 years ago, totally different. And this is, of course, something that also we all are responsible of on the individual level. That, you know, check before you share. Fact checkers are very important, and search for information from various sources so that you would be able to do that. And this is also educated, this is taught at school, so that young people who are very dependent upon social media sometimes get their information only from the social media, so that they would be aware of the risks and of the threats.
In Armenia, the most trusted source of news are local taxi drivers. So all jokes aside, it's interesting actually. There's statistics recently, and you have something like 68% of Armenians get their news in Russian primarily. And then followed by, it's around 20 some odd percent in Armenian, and the remainder is in English. So it's very, very, it seems like there's a very small amount of Western news that gets consumed in Armenia. And that's not to say that one is better than the other, but it's interesting to notice that a lot of the pro-Russian opposition camps, these attempts at destabilization, in spite of the fact that the Armenians get most of their news in Russian, is not leading to a whole lot of real-world effects. And it's interesting because we're mentioning resilience. So I'm going to give you a kind of a trick question here. It's a chicken or the egg question. Is it a high-trust society that is able to then become resilient, or do you need to kind of forge ahead, create that resilience first, which then leads to a high-trust society? Because the criticism is that, well, Finland, it's a different society. They all trust each other, they know each other, it's small, and they're able to do this faster. Whereas, what came first?
I wouldn't differentiate between the two, because they kind of go hand in hand. And I understand that, you know, that Armenian society, or I know that Armenian society is in transition, has been for a very long time already, and in particular since 2018, when these big changes took place. This is about capacity building of the authorities. I don't think that our people are like naturally trust their authorities. That's something that you need to deserve. And this is something that you can deserve with being at the service of your people. And it's also about trusting your neighbor, trusting your school teacher. Who are the people that you believe? Can you trust their messaging? And as for the Russian media, of course, we have to bear in mind that the media that they call media is actually not media in the traditional meaning, but this might also be turned as a benefit, so that people who follow the Russian media probably become more media literate, because sometimes the news production is so absurd that you would understand that this cannot be, and when you lose trust, then you think that what else did they lie about? So this might actually be not only a bad process. Trust is a very complicated thing. You have to deserve it, and then you can lose it quite easily also.
And finally, Madam Ambassador, what advice would you give the Armenian leadership who is seeking to restructure its security architecture, and what can they learn from Finland and implement from Finland?
Well, I think that the thorough analysis of the society is the starting point. That you know your system, you know the vulnerabilities, you map them, then you start addressing them. And I think that the most important learning, which is very, very difficult also in continental Europe, is what I started with, is that the authorities speak to each other, that they share information, that they have shared goals, and that they all see their role in various functions of the society. For instance, Ministry of Defense is important, but equally important is the Ministry of Environment. You can see that the floods in the north actually damage your society and your economy, maybe more
huge water security issues in general, overconsumption of water. It's a big problem in Armenia.
Yes, exactly, which then brings you to the infrastructure, which then brings you to the foreign ministry with the international relations concerning these themes. And if there is which we have in Finland, we have institutions that cover all state agencies and all ministries, and they meet regularly. Sometimes even putting the authorities into one room might already be a good start, because then they would start building the shared language. It's not an easy task, and in particular, sometimes the authorities think that when I share, I lose something. But actually it is not. When you share, you gain.
Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks again for watching CivilNet.